5. Religiosity and the Rise of Supernatural Authority. The biggest storage jars I have ever seen can be found in Knossos, Crete, lying at the heart of what was once a grand palatial complex built around 4,000 years ago. These giant receptacles were designed to hold vast amounts of grain, wine, or oil. It has been estimated that something approaching 20,000 gallons of the stuff was poured into jars in the storage rooms of the palace. The creators of these enormous containers, along with the surrounding buildings, public spaces, and artworks, belong to a very sophisticated civilization. The Minoans. The Minoans had a highly specialized division of labor and a very elaborate system of beliefs and rituals, magnificent architecture, works of art, and systems of trade and tribute linking them to other complex societies as far away as ancient Egypt. This was a remarkable period in world history. Around the time that these Minoan palaces were being built, several other major centers of civilization around the world were also flowering. Not only in Mediterranean, Middle East, and North Africa, but also in parts of India, China, and Peru. They began They began as small city-states evolving into larger regional systems of governance. This same basic pattern unfolded in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley in South Asia, the Yellow River Valley in the Far East, and the pre-Columbian civilizations of the Americas. In each of these regions, remarkably advanced societies evolved out of earlier Neolithic farming communities of the kind described in the last chapter. Farming and the production of surpluses played a central role in this story. Starting more than 10,000 years ago, agriculture first appeared and spread from the regions in which the settlements at Göbekli and Katahoyuk were established to engulf much of the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Farming also spread east, as testified by important archaeological sites such as Megarth in what is now Balochistan province of Pakistan. Balochistan province in Pakistan, which dates from around 8,000 years ago, bringing with it much the same package of practices associated with crop cultivation and animal domestication. Just like the peoples of Katahoyuk, those at Megarth Mergar built their houses out of mud bricks, growing wheat and barley in their fields and raising sheep, goats, and cattle. They also developed remarkable skills in the production of obsidian blades, arrowheads, mirrors, and jewelry.
Obsidian.
Jewelry
shop.
Jewelry. Such creativity became the hallmark of civilizations as in agriculture. As populations grew larger, rates of technological innovation increased. Among these new inventions was the capacity to yoke oxen, horses, mules, donkeys, and water buffalo. The harnessing of traction animals in this way contributed to ever-increasing agricultural surpluses, and societies grew wealthier. Their trading networks expanded, and elites elites and hierarchies began to form. In South Asia, farming societies evolved into the great urban centers of the Indus Valley from around 5,000 years ago. Parallel processes unfolded in China, eventually spreading major innovations in crop cultivation and animal domestication to Southeast Asia, and from there across the Indian Ocean to Africa, and likewise in the opposite direction across the Pacific. And as farming methods traveled, they helped to fuel the rise of many of the world's most remarkable civilizations, from the kingdoms of Madagascar to the paramount chieftains of Polynesia. Moreover, independently of these events in Asia, Africa, and Oceania, a comparable evolutionary process unfolded, mainly starting around 2,000 years ago, in various parts of what is now eastern USA, Mexico, and the northwestern coast of South Africa. In all those regions, advanced societies emerged, from the Mississippian culture of Cahokia to Mesoamerican cities of Central America, and the great Inca Empire spanning most of the western coast of South Africa, including parts of the countries we now know as Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile. But for society to grow in this way, they needed a new form of social control: organized religion. While ritual routinization, discussed in the last chapter, may have been a necessary condition for the rise of more complex societies, it was not sufficient to support very large ones. From the dynasties of ancient Egypt to the paramount chieftains of Polynesia, larger societies depended on top-down system of wealth extraction and political domination, and this took some doing. On the one hand, people had been persuaded that unequal social systems were necessary and morally right. Via the widespread adoption of shared norms, beliefs, and practices. On the other hand, mechanisms of enforcement were required to deter anyone who might be tempted to rebel. The interplay between persuasion and coercion took place largely in the domain of religious beliefs and rituals. This is necessary because the effects of the conformism that we explored in the last chapter become weaker as populations become larger and denser. Part of the reason for this is that as we find ourselves spending more and more our time interacting with relative strangers, the reputational costs of deviance are downgraded. People we barely know are in a weak position to tell us what to do when we step out of line. Hence, the need for ways of actively deterring people from knowingly deviating from the script. Large societies developed a variety of new ways of policing conformism, all with one thing in common. They were closely associated with the exercise of supernatural power, harnessing humanity's natural religious predisposition and susceptibilities. Script. Exactly how power was exercised in ancient Crete remains something of a mystery. Some say that the enormous stockpiles of grain and other foodstuffs in Minoan palaces were part of a system of redistribution. Wandering around the ruins at Knossos, however, I found myself doubting this interpretation. As I stood gazing at the towering jars in the palace storage rooms, I began to suspect that something altogether more sinister was going on. Clearly, this was a society with powerful royal lineage and wealthy elites. Line.
Lineage.
Come on. The artwork suggested an admiration for highly controlled violence, from the exquisitely decorated daggers to sculptures and frescoes depicting male aggression, from boxing matches to images of men stabbing each other in the neck. The part seemed to me less like a product of redistribution than of expropriation. The more I learned about the Minoan palaces, the more I began to suspect that behind the stylish taste and lifestyle seen everywhere, from elaborate board games to massive serving dishes suitable only for the most lavish banquets, there must surely have been a darker side. Expropriation. Property expropriation. Okay. The more I learned about the Minoan palaces, the more I began to suspect blah blah blah. In the ancient world, this kind of wealth typically came at a cost. Nobody really knows just how unequal or oppressive the society was, but when one considers the extraordinary wealth, art, and food stores at Knossos, it is easy to imagine that this was a highly stratified society in which the labor of many was exploited by a relatively small elite. I found myself wondering if the grand palaces of ancient Crete could have been built without slavery, or at least some kind of large-scale exploitation of manual labor. Perhaps when the ancient script of the Minoan civilization is one day deciphered, we will have a clear picture. However, there are other more direct signs of extreme inequality to consider. For example, there is evidence at the sites close to nozzles of violent death consistent with human sacrifice. The ritual killing of humans to please or placate the gods. Placate the gods. Is one of the surest signs of top-down oppression that has ever been produced. Could it be that I was looking at a highly unequal social order legitimized by the appeal to the gods? Gods? The main focus of this chapter is the part played by organized religion in the rise and spread of larger-scale, hierarchical, and centralized societies. As we saw in Chapter 2, our relationship with the supernatural typically takes a handful of extremely widespread forms. For example, to imagine that supernatural agents and forces can help or harm us. To assume that we live on after we die, to attribute intelligent design to the natural world, or to remember and pass on concepts that contradict our intuitions in ways that captivate and enthrall. As societies grew larger and more complex, however, these features of wild religion were tamed and exploited in much of the same way as traction animals were yoked together to pull a plough. Our religious biases were harnessed to control our behavior. Eventually, our beliefs in the supernatural would compel us to submit to rulers, to pay them their dues and fight their wars. Three broad clusters of religious characteristics emerged over time, each exploiting our religious instincts in distinct ways. First, our natural tendency to believe in an afterlife became the reason for expressions of obedience to capricious and often curmudgeonly ancestors. Curmudgeon the ancestors. Next, our expectation that supernatural beings should be socially dominant became a way of legitimate legitimating and legitimating novel forms of political domination. And then finally, our moral instincts were harnessed in ways that enable internally diverse empires, cross-cut by differences of class and ethnicity, to cooperate and compete in an increasingly globalized world. This is not a simple story to tell, however. Although these three dimensions of religion evolved in that order, they did not displace each other, but often became overlain and interwoven. Between them, though these three stages contributed immeasurably to religion as we now know it, forming rich seams in the faith traditions distributed across the world today.